Welcome to the Smith Publicity webinar series, covering a range of book publicity and marketing topics for authors and publishers alike.
Wonderful. Well, let's go ahead and get ourselves started. Just really excited to have everyone jumping in. And Susie, wonderful question. We're going to talk about that right now as I introduce Andrea and myself and our roles here in the publishing industry as we get started. So again, thank you so much everyone for joining us for our first webinar of 2024. We had some really exciting webinars of the last few years and excited to kick off 2024 with a very hot topic, I think in the publishing industry, a very evolving topic in the publishing industry right now as we dig into the bestseller conversation a bit more. When we talked about this topic here at Smith Publicity and we were exploring who we wanted to join us for this, it was really serendipitous that at around the same time we were discussing this, that Andrea DeWerd was popping up on a newsletter that we follow here at Smith. And there was this fantastic interview, great questions answered. And one of our colleagues, Kelly, reached out for a conversation with Andrea. And we had another client who kind of needed some help with bestseller support too. And it just always was, the stars were aligning to kind of bring ourselves together. And over the last few months, we have come to know Andrea even more. I get to meet Andrea in person next week in New York, which I'm so excited about. And we are just seeing how our worlds together are beautifully colliding and supporting each other. So it's just been so wonderful to meet Andrea and to thank you again for joining us today, Andrea. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about you before we get started by sharing your bio, which is going to be in the chat in a brief moment. So Andrea is a book marketing strategist, consultant, writer, speaker, and the founder of the Future of Agency, which is a book marketing and publishing consulting agency headquartered in Brooklyn. Andrea has covered so much incredible ground in her 13 plus years within Big Five publishers. She has 105 plus career New York Times bestsellers under her belt. That's pretty incredible there, and has worked with amazing names from Mary Higgins Clark and literary fiction with Elizabeth Strout to memoirs like Educated by Tara Westover, and narrative nonfiction like the former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. Did I get that? Yovanovitch. Health and wellness and business books, cookbooks, and you name it in between. So Andrea, you have covered it, and you are also an author yourself too.
Yes, thank you.
I think we had a little delay there. So again, Andrea has covered every element of the publishing industry, and now is leading up this beautiful team at the Future of Agency, which we're so excited to be partnering with. Again, Andrea, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Marissa. It's great to be here. And like you alluded to, I've covered a lot of different genres in my time in publishing and marketing. And many of those authors do have bestseller list aspirations. So it's something that has come up early and often in many of our campaigns. So kind of along the way, especially in some of my campaigns back at Random House, which was before 2020 even, we would end up talking about bestseller a lot. And if it's a real goal for authors, how do we make it happen? It came up a lot, especially with nonfiction authors who maybe have a built-in platform. Maybe you authors have done the work to build your platform, and now you have your dedicated followers and you want to make use of them, offer some kind of pre-order incentive. We would talk a lot about that early on to figure out, what can we do to drive all of those sales into hypothetically pre-order campaign or into week one, which helps us take our best shot at the list. So we'll talk a little bit more, I think, about the kind of the logistics, the mechanics of the New York Times list, the other bestseller list today, but it is something I have picked up along the way, covering nonfiction and business books and health and wellness books and a little bit of everything.
Absolutely. And again, what brings us together, I'm Marissa Eigenbrood, president at Smith Publicity. We are a book publicity and marketing agency, and so much of our work is ideally in that build up to the launch. We work with authors of all publishing paths at all stages of their process in getting their book out to the world. And we get the same question and we get the same goals as Andrea is talking about here around the role of the book as part of your author platform, as a business card, if you will, sometimes, And those goals, when we talk about goals at the very beginning, a lot of times the bestseller word comes up. And so we know that there is a puzzle that has to be put together. There's a strategic plan that has to be built between a lot of different players here, and Publicity on our side is just one piece of that puzzle. And Andrea and her team fill in quite a few of those other pieces as well. So that's what's been so great about coming together. And that's what brings us to this great conversation, because we're having it with authors, we're having it together and independently. And we said, let's share more of that, what we're discussing with individuals through this webinar. So I think it's great for us to start off here, Andrea, is, as I mentioned as we were getting started, this is an ever-evolving, ever-changing space right now when it comes to bestsellers. Just before the holiday season, we had the announcement of the Wall Street Journal bestseller list kind of being canceled for now. We'll see what the future holds for it. We had, about the year prior, the shifts and exciting changes in direction that the USA Today list has made, their partnership with the Novel Neighbor and their support of independent bookstores. We certainly always have the New York Times, big question mark over our heads at all times. And then we have things like Amazon bestsellers and a lot of other others in between too, that I think people don't always know about. So I think this is a great time for us to just discuss together a little bit the current state of bestseller lists, the recent changes and such. What are you seeing? What are the questions that are coming up, in the conversations you're having around these changes? And how are you, kind of talking about that with the authors you're working with?
Sure. Yeah. Maybe we just start by giving a little bit of a landscape. So for anyone who is unfamiliar, the New York Times bestseller list comes out online every Wednesday. It runs in print every Sunday. It reflects sales for the previous, basically 10 days before the list runs. It runs for the week prior. Sales are reported on Tuesday. The list runs on Wednesday online. So there's a little bit of a lag time. The sales you're seeing reflected on the New York Times list are happening almost 2 weeks before the list actually runs. A lot of folks don't realize that it's not up to the minute. The Amazon bestseller list, by contrast, is hourly. They refresh those numbers every single hour on Amazon. So there's some authors on the line, or agents, or even publishing folks. You might be refreshing that list and seeing that change really by the minute, sometimes at the top of the hour. Just for context, the New York Times list is broken down by format. There are hardcover and paperback lists. There is a combined list that does take into account ebook and audiobook sales, and they are categorized. So you have nonfiction and fiction running on separate lists, so that those books in pretty different categories are not competing against one another. This is also in contrast to places like the Publisher's Weekly list, which breaks some of the genres like fiction down even further into fantasy and romance and mystery, which helps get additional spots and highlight additional authors, as you might see the same romance authors or the same fantasy authors dominating the fiction list at the New York Times or the USA Today list from week to week. So every list is a little bit different. And the other one I wanted to mention that is worth looking at is the regional independent booksellers list from the ABA. There are 9 different regional lists, which, like Amazon, are a true reflection of sales at the independent bookstores that report into the ABA. So, I guess really the difference is we have bestseller lists, Amazon and the regional bestseller lists, and Publishers Weekly, that are really more sales driven. And then we have USA Today and New York Times, and formerly the Wall Street Journal, that are more technically sales driven, but they're run by media outlets, and we never quite know exactly what algorithm they're looking at and how those decisions are made to make up those lists. Marissa alluded to this, I'm sure many folks have heard, but Wall Street Journal has disbanded their bestseller list as of November. So there's a little bit of a gap in the marketplace when the Wall Street Journal list formerly was a real marker of sales, especially in the business and nonfiction categories.
Yeah, I know the Wall Street Journal is a regular conversation that we have with so many of our nonfiction authors, particularly those in the business space. And so it is such a big change. I know I've heard recently about C-Suite Network launching their bestseller list too. So I think that'll be something really interesting to see over time. I've also heard little bits of maybe the Financial Times will have a list that they come out with, or other larger media entities in that way. Are there any kind of predictions or things that you think might be on the horizon for changes in the space?
I think there's a lot of interest right now in how the lists are determined. So across the board, I think that is the conversation that we're going to see is which of these are really straight sales. The word we haven't really said yet is BookScan. BookScan is the sales tool. It's a sales reporting conglomerate. Consolidation. I don't know the word I'm looking for. It is a platform that consolidates all of the actual book sales from every different retailer. I shouldn't say every, there's a couple retailers maybe that don't report into BookScan, but overall it is a pretty true picture of actual book sales out in the industry. So we know the New York Times does consider BookScan sales. They're looking at actual sales data. We know the USA Today considers actual BookScan data. Wall Street Journal depended on that as well. What we don't know is what else they take into consideration when they're looking at reporting bestseller sales. Amazon obviously is only looking at their own sales, so it's not reflective of the whole industry. Amazon makes up about 67% of the publishing landscape overall. So BookScan is looking at what is that other 1/3 of sales looking like. The independent bookstores and lists make up about 20% of that market. So we're not getting the full picture if we're just looking at BookScan. We're not getting the full picture if we're just looking at Amazon. And I think this is where the lists are going in the future in general. Of consumers are curious. Consumers have, I think, maybe a little bit of mistrust, especially those who are avid readers and are maybe following the list or following authors who are talking about the bestseller lists. And I think they're starting to get curious. How are these lists determined, and what are the sales formulas that go into the determination every week? There's not a lot of transparency here. The New York Times in particular really has a closed door policy, and I think consumers are asking these questions. I think if there were to be a Financial Times list launched, for example, authors in particular, publishers and consumers, I think will want to know how are you different? What are you looking at? The other trend I really see, besides consumers asking a lot of questions and looking at those algorithms, I think about the categories. When I look at the Publishers Weekly list, where they have really broken out fantasy and mystery and sorry, I was going to say thriller. I think thrillers are not actually a category, but they've really broken out some of the larger categories. I see that as an opportunity for some of the other lists to look at, especially when we see books like we see Colleen Hoover's list in particular. Dominating a lot of sales, dominating Amazon sales, all driven by a lot of TikTok trends and trending titles there. It makes it hard for other books to break out. So in the name of equity and giving other authors a chance, letting other books be highlighted, the more we can break down those categories, the more books that can be featured. There are about 6,000 books featured on the New York Times list every year. There are 6,000 spots out of the 3 million books that are published every year. So that is, just the New York Times, like, 6,000 spots. And that's not even including some of the books that are highlighted from week to week to week. You have one book that might dominate and stay on the list for 52 weeks. Breaking those categories down further. Also in nonfiction, if we're going to break out history versus biography, memoir versus advice, how-to versus self-help, that I think that's where things could go, but we need, the publishing industry folks, we need authors. I think we need some folks to make a little noise about it to really help spread the word about other books and lend a hand here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, Andrea. I think that the niching down, as we see the value of in whether it's how you're reaching people through your marketing initiatives, whether it's how we talk about it in publicity efforts, in reaching certain audience specific, trade specific media entities. It would just be so fantastic if we saw that in our bestseller list too, if that niching down allowed for all the business leadership books to be featured here, and then we saw all of our health and wellness books featured here, and they're not going up against each other, because let's be honest, they're not in the same category. They shouldn't be in the same category. But that's how it's been done up until this point. And I think that we've all seen what kind of these kind of an earthquake kind of moment, these like earth shaking moments that are a little bit happening here. And I think that it's forcing us it's giving us all an opportunity to advocate for change here and figure out what that can look like. And I think everyone plays a role in what that looks like. I want to jump over to a question that I see here in the chat from Corey. Great to see you, Corey. He mentions there's a massive trend of independent authors selling directly to their audiences. Do you foresee bestseller lists making effort to account for these sales? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Andrea. And I think, from my perspective, that would have to come from niching. That would have to come from more specialized lists, as opposed to the broader ones. But you're in the depths here, so let me know your thoughts.
Sure. The first thing I think of there is if authors are selling direct, if those sales are especially not recorded even through Amazon or one of the major retailers, we need to be able to verify them. And I think for trust and for authenticity, we need to be able to verify them in some way. So it is easier if authors are publishing direct, especially through, KDP or something. Those are verifiable sales. So I think we're probably looking at two different categories. There are some folks who are selling, direct ebooks on their website. You see this a lot in the health and wellness and entrepreneurship categories where an author may, literally send you their EPUB file from their website and not put it through Amazon or another platform. Those are hard to verify. And, yes, I can see that there could be a level of trust, like trust the authors to report their own sales. But also speaking to that question of consumers wanting to know how the algorithm works and how things are determined. I think that would be tricky to take on without being able to verify those sales through another platform. However, looking at, the Amazon bestseller list in particular, I think that's a great opportunity for indie authors. But I think this transitions a little bit into maybe the next question that we were going to talk about in general is, what does it even mean to be a bestseller? Does it matter?
Yeah,
Does it
right.
matter for traditionally published authors? Does it matter for indie authors? What does bestseller mean, especially in situations where we don't really know how these lists are being determined. We don't know the exact algorithm that the New York Times is using every week. So does that label even mean anything? So for indie authors in general, I think there's also a trend just to kind of say, I want to say, screw it.
Yeah, right.
I'm my language. That's what's coming to mind. And, and say, maybe the lists are not inclusive in that way and not representing the, some of the incredible power behind indie authors. I do think, Amazon sales, I think, can reflect that. The USA Today list does consider ebook sales in a way that I think is maybe more inclusive of indie authors. But I think there is a whole swath of books being published and authors who are doing incredible work without ever attaining that bestseller label that is bestowed by another publication or a list. And I don't know if it really means anything if they're, if you're selling books and you're doing great work. I think there's still a lot you can do without the official label there.
Sure. And when we talk about that official label, I want to jump into the more so what does it mean? Why do we want it? What is it doing for us in terms of platform and everything? But when we think about the label of bestseller, I know that comes into play whether it's New York Times or whether it's Amazon. I know one of our team members, Olivia, was at the Gathering of the Ghosts this past Monday, just a couple of days ago in New York event, which was really great event hosted by Gotham Ghostwriters. And a conversation was coming up around Amazon. And, for the longest time, I think a lot of authors have said, I'm an Amazon bestseller if I was there for, an hour in a certain category. But there's, I guess, a little bit of pushback from Amazon and saying, I've been an Amazon bestseller in a category. I've been consistently hitting a certain list, but maybe not just saying Amazon bestseller unless you are regularly ranking. So that's even a change of mentality from that platform too. So I think that the bestseller term can have very broad meaning, which again comes back to the discussion about value and how truly valuable is it today? I talk to a lot of our authors who, especially our speakers, and I hear so often that if I have that more traditional, whether it was Wall Street Journal bestseller, New York Times bestseller, that I can add into my speaking materials, my pitch decks and such, that carries weight in being able to elevate fees and in attracting new opportunities. So I certainly can see the value from the speaker positioning opportunity, from others who have other business-centric goals what's coming into play. But I would love to hear the goals and the questions and such that come up for you, and maybe how you're also encouraging maybe different mentality or a different shift in goals as well around that bestseller, you know, tag.
So I do want to acknowledge, like, the bestseller tag, to some, like you mentioned, media outlets, it can be important. And I want to acknowledge, Susie Schaefer in the chat says, for some authors, the title of bestseller doesn't matter, but the positioning on platforms can be more important. And I do agree with that, there can be a bit of a bestseller glow, I like to call it. You hit the list, and that is enough for people who are maybe reading the New York Times book review on Sunday, maybe still getting the print edition. You do get you might get additional promotion out of having that bestseller label, maybe having a presence on a list. It might help in pitching. And I think this applies to everything we do in marketing publicity, though, that, one get begets the next thing. You get one hit, and that helps us get additional press, that helps us get additional marketing buzz if we, get one influencer hit, for example. So I think of the bestseller list in the same way that it, that label can help beget additional attention. It's not the be all end all, though. And my gosh, okay, my brain just went in 3 different directions, and I'm like, ooh, I just lost track of your original question there.
Well, I think, okay, we were talking about the bestseller, having that title, what that means today and stuff. And I want to jump over because I love what Sean just said in the chat here. And I just want to flag, I want to make sure we go back to Carson's question a little bit too, about the kind of who the reporters are for BookScan. So I just want to flag that one. But what Sean mentioned here, it's making him think of Barbie. Just because Margot and Greta weren't nominated doesn't mean the movie isn't a hit or both aren't great at what they do. I posted recently on LinkedIn about kind of bestseller lists and the status of them, and there was amazing conversation going on in the comments afterwards. And there was one interaction I had with someone about how we're viewing success, as an author today, and what does success mean? And I think that if we can do that as impact and connecting with audience versus these kind of, expectations of success from years gone by, it doesn't mean that it still isn't impactful to be a bestseller. It doesn't mean you still can't go for that goal out there. It's worth setting. But Sean, your point is so perfect. I watched the Golden Globes. I saw that, they may not have won other awards, but what they did win was the basically blockbuster movie award that they created. I didn't even know that was a thing at the Golden Globes, but they won because they had the greatest impact. Truly, they beat Oppenheimer, and just how many people they got to go out to the theater to watch that movie. That was ticket sales based. And so that's not always going to get you Best Picture award if we're comparing that to the bestseller piece here, but it still sold the most over time. It still reached the most people over time. So it may not have had that coordinated impact that so perfectly hit at that moment, but it did reach everything over time. And I think that when we think about what your impact is going to be of your project, how you're going to reach the right people, the bestseller component often is not as important when we shift our mindset into that direction. But again, we know that feather in your cap can still be very powerful too.
You asked about goals, and I think that's a important thing to hit on when we are talking to authors or clients at the beginning of our campaigns. What can a measure of success be beyond just bestseller list? I talk to clients a lot about what is in our control, and we don't have control over the list. We don't know the algorithms. We don't fully have control over sales. We do to an extent, especially if an author has a platform and we can maybe count on a 3% conversion rate of all of their Instagram followers or newsletter subscribers. But even then, we really have to, still do a great pre-order campaign and make sure that all of their followers know about the book and are incentivized to buy it. The things I also like to look at as other measures of success are things like social media mentions. If we're doing an influencer campaign, how many influencers actually, get the book and post it for their Bookstagram or their other accounts? How many mentions do we get in organic conversation on socials? We do a lot of social listening just to see, what is the buzz like in general. I think that's a good measure beyond sales and beyond bestseller status. We also think a lot about, other things that are more in our control. If we're pitching book clubs or organizations, how many responses do we get to those pitches that we're sending out? So sometimes I think that's important too, to start from the beginning and say to an author, Is bestseller the goal here? Maybe it is. Great. Okay. But, how many books per week do you want to sell? How many speaking events do you want to get out of this? What are some of the other markers for success that maybe can align with bestseller, but maybe are not the bestseller label in and of itself?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think those conversations are so important in really aligning there and making sure that we have the same conversations too. Who are you trying to reach? Why are you doing this? What's the purpose here? And oftentimes, if it comes from education, it comes from conversation, it comes from digging a little bit deeper in this understanding that well, I think some authors just think it should be bestseller goals. It's just the book related goal that we can easily kind of put in front of ourselves. So why wouldn't that be our goal? But when you share those numbers, especially the New York Times numbers of how many make the list versus how many books are published every year, is that where all of your energy and your time and your investment should be channeled toward, when it can be, it can reach a lot more people when you think about it in a different way too. And again, this is not a don't go after bestseller list conversation here. It's just thinking about, being realistic and setting expectations. And it's part of our job always, is setting those expectations with anyone that we work with. So before I forget, I just want to circle back on Carson's question around the main retailers reporting to BookScan. Who are they? So Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org. Meaning, to get diversity from Amazon sales, where should we send buyers to try and gain traction? And Carson's coming from a publisher perspective here.
That's a good question. So BookScan represents about 85% of the industry sales. There's about 15%, mostly through specialty retailers. Maybe, think of like gift shops that also sell books. There have been other specialty retailers. I'm thinking of Williams-Sonoma, that until a couple of years ago, they did not report to BookScan, did not report to the New York Times. So over the years, the proportion of sales that are reported to BookScan has increased as more and more retailers have gotten on board. There are certain requirements that they have to keep up. They have to submit their sales for all books in their store every week. They have to, always be reporting, not just report on, some of their book sales, which they might do if they're becoming a reporting store for a particular book or campaign. They have to agree to always report their sales and always report their books specifically. BookScan is Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It is big box stores like Walmart and Target. It is a number of independent stores. To be completely transparent, Carson, I'm not off the top of my head. Bookshop reports through Ingram, which should be reported through BookScan, but don't quote me on that 100% because I don't have that data in front of me. But I believe it's reported through Ingram, so I think it should be. But I'm thinking the 15% that is not reported is mostly from those specialty channels and a handful of maybe bulk retailers that are doing events or institutional sales directly.
Great.
BookScan does not reflect ebook sales. I think that's important to note. And there's another question about Jane Friedman's list, which is reporting from Bookstat. Bookstat does report ebook sales. So there's also kind of not one place that puts these two statistics together. Another industry challenge is we're looking for authenticity and complete reporting.
Yeah, transparency for sure, and where it's coming in from. Jenny asked a great question around if you happen off the top of your head, and no pressure if you don't have an example here. Andrea, I was trying to rack my brain of one too, but an example of a mainstream book that did not make popular bestseller lists, but continues to sell very well regardless. And I can think of a few of our authors that I know had really big sales, tens of thousands in their first year, did not make the list, and it had to do with a lot coming from speaking engagements and others. The diversity of purchases was the challenge there, but would love anything that might come to mind for you in that way.
I'm not remembering a title specifically, but something we had looked into when I was in my time at HarperCollins. There have been books that have been GMA book club picks or Jenna Bush Hager NBC book club picks that did not make the New York Times list. And I'm not remembering the specific example, but there have been a few of those that were pretty commercial and chosen by a big influencer book club. And what we really realized there, the pattern was that just because it gets a celeb pick, it doesn't automatically mean it's going to make the New York Times list. So give me a moment. I will see if I can think of one of those specific book titles, but there's a novel that is Girl on the Train-ish. I can see the cover in my brain and I can't think of the title. But that's the example that's coming to mind, is that, sometimes we will see something with, big celeb endorsements that just doesn't hit the list. And sometimes that's really just competition. It might be a week when there's a lot of other big books out. There's a couple times of year, like around Mother's Day, and going into summer reading, beach reads, when the New York Times list is just more challenging. There are more books selling more per week in general. So the bottom of the list in a quiet week can be 1,500 or 1,800 copies. In a really challenging week, that is 7,000 or 8,000 copies. So it might have just been, one of those questions of competition in the, Jenna Bush Hager or GMA example. I'm thinking, those books are selling 6,000 copies in a week, and it just wasn't quite enough for what we needed at that particular moment.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love Elizabeth Marshall mentions a couple of great examples here, and Stuart too. And love, I actually have on the top of my pile here, Elizabeth, another Michael Bungay saying your title. So we love Michael, and congrats to him on his recent Thinker's 50 award too. But fantastic examples here of millions of books sold for a number of authors that didn't make those lists, who are winning awards and doing great things, and they're also reaching their audiences in these wonderful ways. I wanted, let's pull back the curtain a little bit more and talk about some of the things like gaming the lists, and these other kind of unique conversations that I think have been very top of mind in the industry for a while. And I think we all know a little bit about that in our world, but we'd just love to hear your perspective on that. And it's certainly something that we all want to guide authors on in the right way. It's right now it's okay when there's a little bit of that happening. It's not a completely taboo topic, because that's how it is. But until things get better, that's going to be part of the bestseller game too. So I'll toss it over to you with that.
Sure.
Loaded question or statement.
Regardless, let's pretend we hadn't just had the conversation about, does bestseller matter? Let's say you want to take a run at the list. Okay, great. The number one thing that I think to consider is really momentum. That, as I was just mentioning, sometimes the list, the numbers you need, it could be 7,000 or 8,000 copies, just depending on the week. So if you want to take a run at it, the most important thing to consider is which week, probably your pub week, the first week the book is available, which week will you have the most sales, and how many additional sales can you funnel into that week? This can even be things like friends and family campaigns. If you have friends, or, say your mom's book club is going to buy copies of your book one day, make sure they all do it in the same week. Try to put as much into one week as possible. For our business authors, if you have any other companies or potential speaking engagements that might consider buying 150 copies of the book in exchange for you to come and speak, try to have them actually place those orders in a concentrated period as much as possible. So you might not go speak to those organizations for 3 months, but can the organization buy the books all during your first week of sales? So all of that is front loading your sales to have your highest potential sales week, hypothetically that first week. We say that because any pre-orders that you have gotten before the book goes on sale, those all count towards week one. So week one, you have more than 1 week. You have your first full week of sales reporting to the New York Times, but you also have anything that would have come in the pre-order period. So those are a couple of things, just thinking about the timing and thinking about, what else can I try to encourage sales-wise to go into this first week. Then we get into some things where, maybe this is really gaming the system, ethical questions. I'm going to not name a politician, but there's a story I always think of a particular politician who bought 80,000 copies of his own book. This is when you see that dagger. If you are not familiar, the dagger is a little symbol on the New York Times. That means we know there were bulk sales here. We know that as, bulk sales, shipping in quantities of over 300, we're all shipping to one location. This politician may not have done anything with these books. They might just be sitting in his garage, but he bought 80,000 copies of his book for week one so that those would count and give him a lift on the Times list. There are stories that come out every couple of years. People will really dig into it. You hear about it, especially when maybe there's misappropriation of campaign funds to buy books or other such things. Considering where did the money to buy those books come from? That is usually when a story will break and we'll hear about it. The concept is really the same. That author was putting as many sales into week one as possible. That is, truly what needs to happen to game the system. The Times is wise to it. Amazon is also wising up to it. If you're buying more than 25 copies at a time from either Amazon or Barnes and Noble, they are paying attention to that. I was going to say they get flagged by the New York Times. We don't know exactly how they get flagged. It is like two people actually sitting in the New York Times office who are looking at these sales every week. So we don't actually know what they're looking at, but quantities of over 25 at Amazon and Barnes and Noble, we have been told, to the best of our knowledge, get looked at in some way. That is my cat Misco, who is no longer interested in this conversation. Oh my. Those are a couple of things. It's truly the large quantities. I'd say authors who are considering buying over 10,000 copies of their book, it does become a question of, access and privilege. Who has money to do that? Who has spare change around to do something like that and buy their spot on the list? We know that the Times and the other algorithms, we know that they dock them in some way. The dagger is, the most obvious way. But there are companies that are very wise to this. They might break up those orders of 10,000. Maybe they break them up into smaller quantities, so they're harder to flag. There are authors that do this completely legally, and not legally, but without flagging any ethical questions. There are authors who genuinely are selling 150 books at a time for speaking engagements and putting all of that into week one, and they use their platform to the best of their advantage to make that happen. Trying to think of any other ethical flags here, and it's really the big one is when I think when an author buys more than 10,000 copies of the book, it doesn't have an immediate purchase purpose for them. They're not going to an event. They're not going to giveaways. They are sitting in a garage. I think that is really when the flags go up, and that is a privilege that they have, and that is how they're making a mark.
Yeah, I think I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation the puzzle that we're putting together for any book launch, whether the bestseller goal is on the horizon or not. There always needs to be all those pieces that come into play. I have been seen firsthand how that has come into play with projects we've been able to partner on together. So can you speak a little bit to the importance of the collaboration between authors' personal marketing teams that they have them, or their social teams, the publisher, yourself, Publicity? Speak a little bit from your experience of why that collaboration is so important, how that works, and even kind of when that needs to start happening too. I think is always that great question of like, hey, I want to go after this goal. When should I start putting that puzzle together?
Yes. Marissa, you maybe have heard me say this phrase before, but I always talk about it as getting all the horses facing in the same direction. So it is very important to have your whole team, author, publishing team, marketing, outside PR, marketing, facing the same direction and driving towards the same goals. And that might be a sales number. It might be that bestseller label. It might just be, again, the other things we mentioned, social mention, speaking engagements, but it is very important because especially when that team is pitching on the author's behalf, they can be asking for different things. So you also mentioned just partnerships in general. And I think of this when, and maybe an author is working with outside partners or trying to book speaking engagements. We could be asking for book sales, or we could be asking for honorariums for that author to get paid. And it's very important for the whole team to be on the same page of, what do we want out of this? What's the best outcome for the author, and what will help the book the most over the life of the campaign. I think the goalpost does move a little bit throughout the campaign. There are times when we want more buzz or media. We just want people talking about the book. Particularly, I'm thinking the 2 weeks after publication. Yes, we want people to keep buying the book, but we also want people talking about it. So there might be weeks when on like social media, newsletter, the priority is getting people to talk about the book. Maybe 1 week, the priority is getting more Amazon or Goodreads reviews, getting people to review the book. And it's important that the whole team is crystal clear on what those drivers are and what activity we're asking outside partners to take. Backing up, we see that pre-order activity has really fell off in the last couple of years, especially after the pandemic. People used to pre-order books 12 months or 6 months in advance, and it was really exciting, especially when on Kindle, your book would download at midnight on the night of the release. We saw that fall off a couple years ago, but then, I'd say 3-4 years ago, pandemic, we were seeing pre-orders still happen about 6 weeks, maybe 2 months before publication time. I think everyone has a shorter attention span these days. So, the closer you are to that instant gratification, that is, the way consumers are spending their money these days. Even in the last year, we've seen pre-order activity fall off, even for authors with huge, huge platforms, huge brands. I think consumers are just pulled in so many different directions. Are you going to go, are you planning for your Barbenheimer activity on a Friday afternoon? Are you going to download your new ebook? Where we're, as consumers, we're being asked to spend our money in so many different ways. Even with inflation, we're seeing people still spend their disposable income on books and movies and other entertainment activities. But I think it's happening on a much more instant gratification timeline. It's happening, closer to the on sale date, closer to release. I think because maybe this is also the TikTok effect, that you see a trend happen one week and like by the next week it is completely moved on. The world has changed. I think that's important just for teams to be aware of as well, that, about 6 weeks out, we want to start that pre-order drumbeat. If it's happening sooner, you might lose consumers' attention span. So, there might be, I think Publicity also works a lot closer to the wire as well, especially as we're seeing journalists and news outlets be like, no, talk to me, the week of publication. Like, we don't have time. So I think those trends kind of go hand in hand, but it's really important for the whole team to be aligned on that. So the social media team is not pushing the book 6 months out when consumers are not ready to buy. You really need that critical mass to hit right around, 2 weeks before sale, 2 weeks after the book is on sale. So everyone is, again, facing in the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And to make sure it keeps going too. I think that's what we're always emphasizing to our authors, especially again, if we take that bestseller component out of the equation, we want to make sure the energy keeps going after publication date. You don't want that one day to be, or the couple weeks around to be the end all be all for you. And that, especially if you have other brand platform goals for yourself around it, whether you're fiction, nonfiction, whatever genre you're falling in, keeping people in your brand ecosystem with you, staying engaged with you well beyond just the launch of your book. It's one component of your overall plan, but you want to make sure that you keep that energy going. And that's certainly going to happen through publicity. It's going to happen through other marketing communication and continuing to drive in those Amazon reviews and the other support for your book, well after that particular timing. But fantastic points there made, Andrea. I want to be conscious of our time, make sure we leave some time for questions at the end. So I want to come through just a little bit of a wrap up type conversation here. As you're again looking ahead, and we've touched on this a little bit, but would love any kind of final thoughts you might have, final predictions, if you will, for the future of bestseller impact, the future of bestseller lists, and kind of what's to come in the publishing industry. Maybe will something replace them possibly in some way. I'm throwing out some different ideas here, but would love your perspective.
If I haven't said it in a really crystal clear manner, I want to make sure I say that I trust BookScan data. I trust actual sales information. So BookScan, and then the BookStat. I always want to call BookStat something else. That word always escapes me. BookScan and BookStat. I trust them a lot. I put a lot of stock in them. Truly, this is just my personal opinion, but I would like to see them be maybe more transparent. Maybe not more transparent, more accessible. BookScan is very expensive. So if you have never looked at getting your own individual license for BookScan, it is tens of thousands of dollars. I would love to see more accessible options there for authors, for publishing. It is very important. And obviously, like, we are paying for quality. We're paying for them to really verify sales. So I trust it, but I would like to see it, become more accessible. And BookScan is accessible for authors through, I think, the Authors Guild and Publishers Marketplace. So if you, as an author, as an individual, are curious about that, they do have limited memberships that have, I think, a $25 monthly fee, which is granted so much more accessible, but it's limited. You can only look up 5 books per month. So that's my one. I feel that that is what we need. I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but having everyone on the same page, trusting actual verified sales, I think is very
Mm-hmm.
important. Um, the other last thought I just want to wrap up is that, I think we haven't said the word ego in this whole conversation, but sometimes I think bestseller lists are just, they're a little bit for our ego. And I'm thinking about this myself
Mm-hmm.
as I'm publishing my first novel this fall. And I was like, ooh, do I want to be a bestseller? And I'm like, I kind of do, but I know that is just about ego. Like that doesn't mean my book is successful. It just means it's just a little bit of ego stroking. So I think for our authors on the line and for our publishing teams who are advising authors, you got to get really crystal clear at the beginning of that conversation. If you want to be a bestseller, that is totally okay. But I would try to acknowledge, where is that coming from? What does it mean to you? What is it actually going to do for your book? Is it something you need in addition to, again, those other markers of success that we're talking about? Or is it really just for your ego? So
Right.
ask yourself that question. If it really will actually help continue your book, by all means, go for it, please.
Mhm.
But I think that's a good question to ask yourself really at the beginning of your campaign.
Yeah, no, it's such a great question, and I love to say to someone when that goal comes up in our conversations, why? And why? Tell me why.
Yeah.
And if they can beautifully articulate it because it's going to do X, Y, or Z quickly, then all right, let's dive into that conversation further. If it's I see their eyes glaze over a little bit, and they're like, I thought I was supposed to. Let's dig through that one a little bit more and talk about maybe helping with some alignment on goals that I think could be even more impactful. I don't ever want to take that big hairy audacious goal away from someone, but I also, as we all do, want to set realistic expectations with those that we get to work with and set realistic goals and plan a strategy in any piece of what you're doing that's going to help try to reach those goals. So we've got one more question over here. I'll jump into, and then I want to just, before I go over to Catherine's question, please dump all of your questions into the chat right now. We have about 10 minutes left, and so we'd love to touch on as many of them as possible. So we'll keep an eye out. We'll try to keep track of all of them, but I'm going to go up to Catherine's first question. Do you know if Ingram Spark paperback pre-orders count toward Amazon bestseller list when the book launches?
This is a great question.
Yeah.
I know Ingram counts the pre-orders. I don't know if Ingram reports them to Amazon in that way. Susie Schaefer in the chat says yes. So
Thank you, Susie.
thank you, Susie. I was just say, I'm like, I know Ingram counts them, but yes, that makes sense to me that they would. So thank you, Susie.
Yes. Catherine has another great question here too. Is it true that ranking as an Amazon bestseller pushes your book up in rankings? Love that question, because I think if we're gonna go for a particular category bestseller goals, maybe a bestseller goal that might be a little more attainable than some of the other ones sometimes. The algorithms certainly come into play with Amazon. So Andrea, feel free to share your thoughts there.
So not to my knowledge, actually, I think having one Amazon ranking does not necessarily affect the others. I will say there is very little transparency around how Amazon chooses those categories. You might be a bestseller in, we had a book about, I'm working on a kid's book that, we had a bestseller in kids books about fish the other day. And that made me laugh because I'm like, sure, kids books about fish. Absolutely. We don't know. I mean, that one, there is a fish in the book. I see how they did it. They might be pulling from the description, but like, it's not a BISAC, it's not a category. So we don't always know how Amazon is choosing those categories. What I can say very confidently is books on Amazon get additional merchandising. They get additional support when they have high star ratings. When you have over 25, 4 to 5 star ratings, like we know that for sure. That is what matters. We didn't talk about this, but some Amazon bestseller rankings, they are also, again, because they're updating hourly, some of them are about momentum. So it might just be that you sold 3 books in the last 24-hour period after not selling any books in the many 24-hour periods before that. So sometimes it is a comparison. It is about momentum and rate of sale on Amazon more than actual sales. It truly sometimes can be, 3 to 5 books sold pop you up to the top of that, children's books about fish category. So, take those with a grain of salt, but they're always about rate of sale more than always other, overall.
Yeah. Susie, you should be in here with us. You're adding such great insight into the chat here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susie.
Really appreciate it. Rosie asks a big question of us. Who is the best team leader if you want to sell lots of books, be a bestseller? And I think that you certainly have to have a bit of a quarterback to your efforts. And Andrea's team is so wonderful at being able to cover a lot of the different areas to support around those particular goals and work toward those. But I'm going to say the author is. The author is the best team leader when you want to sell a lot of books and be a bestseller, because what network are you bringing to the table? What are you willing to put in? I hate to have to point the finger back out at the, everyone, here who is in that writer's seat, but I'm sure you feel that pressure as an author yourself, Andrea, for your launch this fall, is that it's going to come down to who am I talking to in my networks? How am I connecting with them? How am I getting them excited to support me in this? Those purchases, especially for bestseller goals, are going to come from your network first. The warm leads, the people who are excited to support you. When it comes to, publicity, we're bringing in cold leads to your world. So we're trying to convince other people to come in and want to be a part of your world and want to support you as well. But it really is, no matter who you hire, no matter who you bring into the mix, unless you have someone who is, covering everything for you. They're your voice on social media. They're your voice in your newsletter. They're your voice, everything that you are out there. And the only thing you're doing is being the voice on podcast interviews. But I think there's some AI that might be able to do that for you these days too. There has to be the author very much at the heart of it. So I just want to emphasize that very much so. But there's some great teams to bring in to round out that effort.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the authors who are willing to hustle, I can't say that, that's the only thing that's ever going to drive them to bestseller, but the authors we really see working for themselves, pounding the pavement. I feel like they end up seeing a lot of success. So overall, just very much generalizing there, but
yeah. And Susie, always here, making great points. You can hire someone to run the campaign, but running the campaign is, again, just one component of that for sure. Shannon asked a great question. How can authors use their speaking platform to help reach a bestseller status? So we talked a little bit earlier about the bulk sales and, kind of the in lieu of speaking fees. Any other particular ideas? I always encourage, making sure you have that really clear slide you're adding into your decks, to your materials. The book should be everywhere. When you're in that build up to launch, the book should just be all over anything you're sending out, just to make sure people know that it's in the mix. But any further ideas or specific actionable things you'd add in there?
Yeah, the real short version of this is like negotiation 101. It's uncomfortable to negotiate honorariums or speaking fees in general. So practice, and email is helpful if you feel awkward about it. So really short sentences that I recommend are, is there a speaking fee available? And then saying something like, I'm willing to waive, or my speaking fee can be flexible if you're willing to purchase books upwards of 100 copies. The books might be available at X% discount. Working with bulk retailers, typically that discount is about 30 to 40%, depending where your book is available and who your publisher is. That's it. 3 sentences. So excited about the opportunity. Talk to you soon. Keep it really simple, but practice asking. The worst they can say is no. And maybe you were going to speak for free anyway. That's okay. But start asking, and start asking if they can buy the book instead of a speaking fee, or sometimes in addition to. Sometimes they will give you, 50% honorarium, 50% buy 100 books, 150 books. So give it a shot. Ask. And if you feel super awkward asking on your behalf, maybe sometimes that is when you might need outside help, and that is okay. But you got to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to wrap us up with one last beautiful glass half full question that we have here from Julie. You did it. You're a bestseller. How do you promote it? What do you do with it? And I love that particular point. I know from our perspective, when it comes to publicity, we are, we're shouting it from the rooftops. We're sharing it in our pitches that we continue to work on post-publication, we're making sure that everyone knows that that wonderful, moment has been achieved for this particular title. We are definitely encouraging that it be added to, whether it's Amazon listings or social media platforms or website copy. There's those great little emblems you get to add to the front cover of the book and such too. But any other, marketing particular initiatives that you encourage authors to do once they've reached that exciting moment.
As for SEO purposes, update your book description right away. It should be the first word, bestseller. You do the little vertical line. I don't know what that symbol is called. Beginning your description, add it to your website, because that is how people search on Amazon, best-selling books of X date. It should be probably 3 pieces of content on social media. Make it a video, make it a graphic, make it a carousel. So every hit you get, use it, reuse it in as many ways as possible, and send an author newsletter if you haven't already. Say those kind of 3 things: website, Amazon listing, social, and newsletter. Those are 4 things. Do those 4 things.
Yes. Wonderful. Well, we are just at our time here. So I want to thank everyone so much for joining us today. Olivia has noted for us, we will be sharing a recording afterwards for anyone who has registered. We'll have it shared on our website as well. Please connect with Andrea, myself on LinkedIn, reach out with follow-up questions. We're here for that. We're excited to just continue these conversations with so many of you in this ever evolving topic. And I feel like my prediction is going to be that in a year, we're going to have to do this again, because there's going to be a lot of other changes this year too with the list. So excited to see where things go, hoping for the best. And with that, again, thank you so much for your time, Andrea. We really appreciate you joining us.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.